Well, hi, everyone. I hope we have connected to Facebook and gotten on live. Let me just press Instagram for a minute because we're going to go live there as well. And so I'm so happy to be here with you today. I've been sick for, 6 months. I've had pneumonia, bronchitis, COVID, and hopefully I'm on the tail end of all that. But welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's topic. And it's kind of a hard topic. So we're going to have to take a deep breath because today we're talking about what might be possible if you learn to be honest with yourself. Oftentimes in these Facebook Lives and in our times together, we talk about problems with someone else. But the most important relationship that you have is with God. And the second most important relationship that you have is with yourself. And if you're not honest with God and you're not honest with yourself, other relationships just aren't going to work. Now, we can talk all about your husband not being honest with himself, and that's a problem for sure. But what do you think keeps you from being honest with yourself? What keeps you from being honest with yourself? You know, the Bible talks, I was just at the Restore conference. If any of you know the Royce Report, which is an amazing report that you can subscribe to, ROYS report. Julie Royce is an investigative reporter, and she reports on church but church abuse of power. She, pastors who are sexually abusing people, pastors who are misusing their power, churches that are not handling their finances well. So, and she reports on some good stuff as well, but she lets us know what's really going on in the body of Christ. And one of the things that she said at this Restore conference that I was just at, I was speaking there as well, was, Diane Langberg is just the preeminent teacher in psychology in churches about self-deception. And she says, self-deception is not the worst thing that we can do, but self-deception is the means by which we do the worst things. Let me say that again. Self-deception is not the worst thing that we can do, but it's the means by which we do the worst things. I mean, how could a pedophile possibly justify doing what they do if they're not full of self-deception? It's not that bad. He really likes it or she really likes it. We're in love. All kinds of crazy talk inside their head. But sometimes those of us who are the victims of that are also prone to self-deception. The Bible tells us that self-deception is one of the most prominent problems that we will have in this life as a human being. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all else. Who can know it? The psalmist prayed in Psalm 119:29, Lord, keep me from lying to myself. And in Romans chapter 1, Paul says, by nature, by our very sinful nature, human beings naturally exchange the truth of God for a lie. So if that's you, and it is, don't beat yourself up and don't fall into a shame attack or a guilt attack. We all are prone to lying to ourselves. And I think Christian women are especially good at it. I think we're good at pretending. Oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. We're good. When things are awful at home and that you're crying your eyes out at night or denying reality. I don't want to see that he's cheating or lying, so I'm just not going to look. I'd rather pretend things are fine and everything's good than find out ugly reality. Even if our own body is falling apart, we have a lump in our breast, or we have a cold, or we don't want to go to the doctor, we don't want to find out the truth, because sometimes the truth is very hard and very ugly. I get it, ladies. I get it. Yeah, you're right. Isn't self-deception also known as denial? Yeah, absolutely. Denial, pretending. What are some other words that we use to describe self-deception? I deny reality. I spin reality. I pretend reality isn't really what it is. What else do we do? What else do we do? Our marriage was a lie, and sometimes it is, but we're lying to ourselves by colluding with the lie. Like, this is not a healthy marriage. And yet I keep trying to make it into something that it isn't. and it's not working, and I'm not facing that reality. Because you cannot make a good marriage, a healthy marriage, all by yourself. You just can't do it. You can't make any relationship good all by yourself. You can make it more peaceful all by yourself by not arguing and by not repaying evil for evil. You can do that. And in my book, How to Act Right When Your Spouse Acts Wrong, I talk about that. But you cannot make a bad relationship a good relationship all by yourself. So what's the payoff of self-deception? Well, we get to feel better in the moment because, it's not really true. Or we get to avoid the responsibility of the truth, taking care of ourselves or taking care of our situation. So if I don't ever open my mail, then I don't really know how much money I'm in debt, and I don't see all the overdraft notices, and I don't see all the bills coming in because I don't want to know. So I don't have to face reality if I am not willing to look at the truth. But what does Jesus tell us about the truth? You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. But how could bad truth set you free? How could bad truth set you free? Yeah, so let me answer some of the questions of what is the payoff of self-deception? Yeah, you continue to suffer unnecessarily. Sometimes the truth you suffer, and you do suffer, right? But we go through a lot of unnecessary suffering because we will not face the truth. We also pay a big price in stupid tax because when we finally come to the truth, maybe we've made a lot of bad decisions in pretend land, in denial land, and we've wasted a lot of time. And so we end up with a lot of regrets. Like, I wish I would have. Why didn't I do this 10 years ago? Now I'm 60 and I'm having to retire, and now I have less options than I would have had at 40. Why did I do this to myself? And then we beat ourselves up because we lived in la la land, or we lived in pretend land, and we closed our eyes and we refused to see reality. Lisa wonders, can I be codependent to why I'm lying to myself? Could be. These are really good self-examination questions. You know, one of the things of good mental health, and one of the things I try to teach women, not just, about your marriage and relationships, but about you. In order for you to have good mental and emotional health, as well as spiritual health, you need to have a courageous commitment to reality at all costs. Healthy people live in reality even when it's hard. And when you refuse to look at reality, both your internal reality, all right, my feelings, my thoughts, my innermost being, all of that, or your external reality, what's happening out there, are you accepting the truth? Are you accepting the truth of that you see? Or are you spinning it and denying it and avoiding it and lying to yourself and deflecting and minimizing and pretending? These are all words that psychologists use as defense mechanisms so that we don't have to face the truth. But it costs us. It costs us. If you feel a lump in your breast today and you tell yourself, oh, it's probably nothing. That's what we want to do. We want it to be nothing. But if you don't check out this reality, I have a lump in my breast, I don't know what it is. So I don't want to jump to the conclusions that I have breast cancer and I'm going to die. That would also not be true. But to avoid or to deny or to pretend or to minimize, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you. And so what we do as good Christian women oftentimes is we waste so much time and energy pretending, minimizing, avoiding, because to jump in the pond of truth is scary and hard for some of you, because what you're having to deal with, even a lump in your breast, feels so scary you don't want to deal with it. Or having to face what's going on in your home is so scary you don't want to have to deal with it, or you don't even know how to deal with it. And that, again, is a good thing for you to be aware of, because self-awareness and telling yourself the truth, wow, I'm in a horrible space in my marriage. when I don't know what to do, but I have to do something, gives you a step one. I need to find some wise advice. I need to get some wise help because I don't know what to do. But I do know I'm full of resentment. I'm full of anger. Our kids are seeing me blow up. I'm getting depressed. I'm drinking too much to cope. These honest self-awareness and self-examination tools help you grow. They're not meant to shame you. They're meant to help you see what your next step is, and your next step, and your next step. And it's so easy to look at what the other person's next step is and forsake our own. Yeah, Gail says, being married to someone with problematic sexual behaviors brings much deception to the relationship. Divorcing is so hard, and post-divorce, even more trauma with huge scars on the children. Don't think your kids don't have scars if you stay in that kind of relationship. They do. Different kind of scars, but still scars, okay? The journey is huge. Support system is so vital during this. The consequences for lying to yourself is so hard when the adult children have no idea what you've been living and they blame you. So this is something very real that I want to unpack for you. And if you're in this kind of situation, we're doing a free workshop on Thursday, 2 days from now. It's going to be an hour long. I'm going to teach it to you in an organized way, not just have a conversation. I'll have a conversation with you afterwards in the Q&A, but I'm going to teach you some key concepts about this truth telling to yourself. What do you need to do so that you can get stronger and healthier inside so that you can deal with whatever's going on out here in a God honoring, but healthy, clear way? Because oftentimes as Christian women, we've been taught God honoring is to suffer in silence and sacrifice your well-being for the sake of your marriage. But is that true? Is that what God asks you to do? To sacrifice the best of who you are, who Lisa Turker says it really well. I'm not sure I'm going to quote her exactly, but the best of who you are in order to enable the worst and someone else to flourish so that you don't have to get divorced? Is that what God asks of a Christian woman? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I'm going to show you the verses, and I'm going to show you exactly step by step in this workshop. So the workshop's called I'm Not Okay When He's Not Okay, for sure. But how do you fix you? Because you can't fix him. You've tried, you know that. We'll talk about how we get spun in that codependent cycle of trying to fix him, trying to help him, trying to rescue him, trying to save him. And we get plumb worn out and angry and resentful, and nothing changes. Because as much as you love him, you can't change another person. Only they can do that work. Just like I care about you, ladies, but I can't change you. I can educate you, but I can't do your work. Only you can do your work. Even your children. You love your children. You want them to learn piano. You want them to learn math. You want them to learn, social skills. You can teach them, but they won't learn them unless they take it in and do the work. And so I hope that you come to our workshop. Let me give you the URL to get registered, because if you haven't registered yet, you're not coming to the workshop. The workshop is not on social media. It is on my private webinar site, and it's free. It's this Thursday at noon Eastern time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. I will be doing it live. The workshop itself will last about 45, 50 minutes. And you'll get a workbook ahead of time. So please check your email. You have to give us your email so we can send you the link for the workshop, as well as the workbook. You download the workbook so that you will have it during the workshop so that you can take notes and educate yourself. Know what the Bible says about self-deception, but also how do you deal with this? If he's got a porn problem, or he's got a lying problem, or he's addicted, or he's lying to you and he's cheating on you, or whatever he's doing that's destroying you in the marriage, you have to have a battle plan, girl, and you want to have a godly battle plan. And the typical battle plan that Christian women have been given is love more, give more sex, sacrifice more, and stay together at all costs for the children. But when I was writing my book on destructive marriages, I interviewed women who did just that. And it didn't help. We're given this promise that if you do all that, he's going to come out to be some glorious man at the end of the day. But can't God change him? Yes. But here's a truth bomb. God doesn't change anybody who doesn't ask to be changed. Just because you're praying for him doesn't necessarily mean that he wants to change. It's only when he bows the knee and is willing to change and does the work to change will change really happen. But that's true for you too. So what does it cost you when you're fighting reality and you're not willing to change? Because oftentimes we're told a lie as Christian women that what we're doing is godly. We're really, really godly with all our sacrifice, with all our suffering. I'm going to draw you a little chart. I've done this before. Let me grab my whiteboard, and this may help you. And if you haven't signed up for our workshop, please do. So if you want to be a healthy, godly woman, what does that look like? So we're going to make a little ruler here, and we're going to put a 0 here, and we're going to put a 1, 2, 3. We're going to put a -1, -2, -3 here. Okay, everybody see that? I'm not the best talker and charter at the same time. If we think about what does just one quality, selflessness, which is what we're told to do, selfless and selfish. All right, so what's healthy? What's healthy? Is there a healthy selfishness? Of course. Like when I'm in intensive care, I want to decide who's coming to visit me. I don't want to be told I have to see the pastor at that time. If I'm having a birthday, I want to be celebrated. Is that selfish or is that healthy? That's healthy. So healthy selfish is right around here. So here's normal, or here's neutral. Here's a little bit selfish. Here's a little bit selfless. God calls us in Philippians 2. Do not merely look out for your own interest on this side, but also for the interests of others, so that we are to give, we're to care, we're to sometimes sacrifice even our life for the good of another person, not to enable their bad, all right? But this is what Christian women have learned. When a person is really, really selfish, we might call them narcissistic traits, all right? All right, so they have unhealthy narcissistic traits. What kind of woman do you think they would be attracted to? Well, they're not going to be attracted to a healthy woman, because a healthy woman is not going to put up with this. So they're going to be attracted to a selfless woman who's unhealthy in a selfless way. But she's lying to herself, saying, this is godly. It's godly for me to sacrifice and suffer, to help him, to serve him, to love him, to submit to him, to do everything he wants, which you're just feeding the selfish monster, and you're getting more and more depleted. So what might be possible if you stopped lying to yourself that this was godly, and you started moving toward healthy selflessness, maybe right around here, not over here, not first all the time, but just taking care of yourself, having boundaries, speaking the truth in love, walking toward good emotional, spiritual, mental health. What would happen, do you think? Well, the minute you start speaking up for yourself and you start saying no, what's going to happen here? He's going to put you down. He's going to shame you. He's going to make fun of you. He's going to criticize you. He may spiritually abuse you. And then you start getting anxious because, maybe I did the wrong thing. And you start sliding right back there. And so, girlfriend, this position, someone said codependent. Yeah, that I don't have a life. My whole life is around taking care of him and feeding his life. But that's not stewardship of you. God calls you to be a steward of you. That doesn't mean we don't care about our husband, or we don't care for them or our children, but we don't overfunction. So if that's you and you've been lying to yourself, what does it cost you? And what might be possible if you learn to be honest with yourself? I remember a woman who was terribly abused in her marriage, and she kept lying to herself, saying, but I'm being a godly woman. I'm being a godly woman. I'm submitting. I'm doing everything that God wants me to do. No, she wasn't. A godly woman in the Proverbs is described as a woman of valor. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future unafraid. When you live in a love-based fear, a fear-based love, but I'm afraid. If I don't do this, he'll reject me. He'll leave me. That's not biblical love. That's fear. So what might be possible if you began to wake up and learn to be honest with yourself. I'm not saying be honest with him, especially if you're married to a narcissist. They can't handle it. But honest with yourself so that you can get the help that you need to be the woman that he needs you to be in order for perhaps him to wake up. And he may not, because Jesus was Jesus and Judas didn't wake up and others didn't wake up either. So it doesn't mean that if you're a godly person, other people are going to immediately like the light. In fact, the Bible says, oftentimes darkness hates the light. We're a fragrant aroma to some, and we're a stench in their nostrils to others. But your main allegiance is to God. God wants you to be a God-centered woman, not a husband-centered woman or a marriage-centered woman. The Bible calls that idolatry. Oh my gosh. So what would be possible for you if you began to rearrange your allegiance and love your husband, love your children, but not enable their bad behavior out of fear of criticism, fear of rejection, fear of conflict? What may be possible if you got strong enough to lovingly say, no, I'm not going to live this way anymore. No, I'm not going to do that. Have some boundaries. What might be possible? It feels kind of scary for some of you, doesn't it? And that's why we need support. That's why you need support. Lisa says, I feel so guilty to say no to him. When he planned a trip, he told me he can't please me and complain about a free trip he paid for. Yeah, sometimes we get blamed just for saying no, like we're not allowed to say no. We're bad. We're putting rain on his parade. And when that happens, pay attention. Am I doing that? Am I supposed to always say yes? Is it my job to do everything he wants me to do? Am I responsible for his happiness? We've taken that as our burden, but that is not what the Bible says. Each of us are responsible for our own life, to steward our own life and to steward our relationship. But we can only do our part. You can't do his part. You can't make him be honest or self-reflective. You can only own your part. Tammy says, but are we not called to submit to and accept rampant destructive behavior? In fact, the opposite is true. We are supposed to help our spouse to know, serve, love, be more like Jesus. This means limiting their ability to sin against us. Yes, absolutely. Sometimes the only way to do this is through separation. Absolutely. Ephesians 5:11-14. Do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Rather, expose them. Can be an act of grace for a wayward man. But you don't know how to do that yet, but I'm going to teach you how to do that in the workshop. So please come to the workshop so that you can learn how to be okay, even if he's not okay. How do you learn to stand in your okayness before the Lord and in truth, even when there's conflict and turmoil? How do you learn to manage your side of the street in life, even when other people are not managing their side of the street in life? You see, so often the codependency is my well-being is dependent on you behaving like I want you to behave. And God doesn't want your well-being to be dependent on other people. Your well-being is to be dependent on him. I have given you everything you need. I've been pondering this verse for probably 2 years now. It's in 2 Peter 1. I have given you everything you need for life and godliness. What does that mean? What if he's given us some things that we need to grow up, to mature, to face the truth, and those things are hard? What if we need to learn boundaries and he's given us a narcissistic spouse to teach us boundaries, to teach us self-stewardship, to teach us to use our voice to speak up for ourselves? Because he needs that too. Whether or not he receives it or not is not up to you. How you deliver it is up to you. Those are the things that I want to teach you, and we will unpack all of that in the workshop. So I hope that you've signed up, and if you know somebody else who might need to sign up, I encourage you to go to leslievernick.com/join webinar. leslievernick.com/join webinar. And you will get a little form to fill out with your email so that we can send you the notes for the workbook and also the link on Thursday for the workshop. And it's going to be on a private space, not on social media, so that you have a little bit more safety in chatting with other women who are in that same situation, as well as ask your questions afterwards. Yeah, and so I was reading Philippians yesterday, and and I've probably read Philippians. I'm getting old. I've read it at least twice a year for 50, 55 years, 65 years. So I've read it a lot of times. I've read Philippians a lot of times. But what I was really struck by is the one thing. The one thing, he said. This is the one thing. And he said, all things have served this one thing. What's the one thing, Paul says in Philippians? He says, even the hardships have served this one thing. That I might know him, that I might mature in him, that I might become the man that God's called me to be, that my character would grow to be more and more Christ-like. And Paul in 2 Corinthians was pretty strong and tough. So it doesn't mean being this wimpy, accommodating victim. It doesn't mean that. And so if God allows hard things in your life, whether it's a hard relationship or health issues like I'm having right now, these are things to help us, to help me learn what's really important, learn to center on what's really true, to grow my faith, to learn to have boundaries with someone who may be taking advantage of you. How do you learn that if you never have to experience that? How do you learn to love an enemy if you never meet an enemy? How do you learn to forgive if someone's never harmed you? These are life lessons in building our character. But if we deny them, we avoid them, we want everything to be sunshine and lollipops in our life, and we're angry at God that he's brought hard into our life, we won't have the opportunity to grow and develop our character. So let me ask you this question, and I'd like you to write some answers, and I'm going to invite you to ask me some questions about a struggle that you're facing in accepting hard, accepting truth, accepting reality. What might be possible if you learn to be honest with yourself and walk in the truth? I would just like you to write some things down. What might be possible? And the second part of that question is, what does it cost you not to? What does it cost you to avoid, minimize, deny, lie, pretend, blame, avoid, deflect, spin, all of the ways that we avoid reality, right? And not look at the truth. What's possible if you started looking at it and dealing with it and learning how to handle it in a good way that would grow your character and give you muscles of strength, perseverance, give you a voice to speak the truth in love, to give you courage to expose the unfruitful deeds of darkness? And what does it cost you to stay deceived? And I'd love you to put that in the chat, right? How do you know the difference between hard and tolerating bad behaviors forever? So I think this is a really good question, Jen. So I'm so glad you asked this. I think we're to learn in relationships, especially marriage, learn that you're not always right. You don't have to always have your way. That's why it says submit to one another, right? You don't have to always have your way in order to be happy. You don't have to always be right. You're probably not always right, right? And so in relationships, these are important things to learn. And so one of the things that Paul says is in relationships, be forbearing. Everybody's got stuff. Everybody's got stuff. And so we need to be gentle and forbearing. Galatians 6:1, if anyone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, talk to someone in a spirit of gentleness. So it doesn't say ignore it. It says talk to someone so that they may be restored. Now, it doesn't mean they will be restored, but you don't just keep silent about it. So we're to be forbearing, and we're also to be confrontive. Hebrews 3:13 says, let us encourage one another day after day, lest any one of us become hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. Iron sharpens iron. We speak the truth in love to one another. And so it's both and. We are to forbear one another's weaknesses or personality differences. But are we to forbear serious sins that are destructive to our children, to them, to ourselves? So if someone has a drinking problem that's destructive to themselves, to their potential person, to their children, because they're ignoring their children or they're being abusive to their children when they're drinking, this isn't something to forbear. This is something to distance yourself from if you need to. Hey, when you drink, I'm not gonna, you can go to the basement, not, as long as you don't bother us. I can live with that or I can't live with that. You have to decide the truth of that. But it's not something that we just accept as okay, right? It's not okay. It's not only not okay for you, it's not good for them. And for you to just tolerate that when someone, I'm not saying someone can't have a couple beers and all of those. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about excessive drinking that costs them their personality and their safety and your safety. To tolerate that and forbear that, I don't believe that's biblical. I don't believe that's stewarding your body and your spirit very well, to get in a car with someone who's had too much to drink. To steward your children's safety that way. And you're responsible for that. So there's this forbearance piece. Hey, I've had this habit for all of my marriage of leaving. I cut lemons up in the morning for my tea and I leave them out. It bugs my husband to death that I leave these lemons out. He doesn't tell me about it anymore. For the first 10 years, it's like, why do you leave your lemons out? I just leave my lemons out because I use them all day long and I'm okay with that, right? You forbear. You have to get used to how someone does something different than you. It's okay. You learn those things. But there's certain things that we're not to forbear. We're not to forbear. We're to confront. We're to deal with it. Paul says in Corinthians, hey, someone's sleeping with another man's wife. You're forbearing that? No, we don't do that in the church. Right? And so there's the forbearance, yes, and there's the non-forbearance. So sometimes we're lying to ourselves that we're doing something spiritual by forbearing when we really should be confronting. In love, in truth, taking the log out of our own eye before we try to remove the speck in someone else's eye, for sure. Yeah, so sad I lived that life so long. So we don't forbear deal breakers is what you're saying. Well, we can lie to ourselves about that. So let me say this. Sometimes deal breakers are not biblical sins, right? So deal breakers for some people might be, I don't want to live with a messy person, right? That's not a sin that you should break a marriage over, but it's certainly irritating. Be a good thing to know that ahead of time. So if that's really a deal breaker for you in a marriage situation, you don't marry that person. But once you're married, I don't know that that's a legitimate reason to leave a marriage if someone's sloppy. It may aggravate the heck out of you, and you may need to learn to forbear that or clean up after it. You can decide which one you want to do, but you're probably not going to change that person. So you decide your deal breakers, but if those deal breakers are harming them, harming you, and harming your children, or either one of those, for you to stay silent. One of our staff members' husband talks often about her husband who had a black mole on his face, and he was ignoring it because he didn't want to deal with it. He was telling himself, oh, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing. He was lying to himself. And she was his easer. She was his helpmate. And she's saying, you need to go to the doctor. You need to go to the doctor. You need to go. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you going to the doctor? This is serious. It's getting bigger and bigger. Go, 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 go. He didn't go. You can't make someone go. She spoke the truth to him. And then finally his father saw it and said, what's on your face? You need to go to the doctor. And finally that was enough to enable him to say, I've got to stop lying to myself and I've got to go. And it was serious cancer. And so we don't ignore what's wrong trying to be nice. That's not the loving thing. Now, it's not loving to comment on someone's life just because we wouldn't live it that way, right? It's not loving to say you shouldn't be Republican or you shouldn't vote this way or you shouldn't do that. That's not our place. But when someone is harming themselves and harming you and harming your kiddos by their behaviors, by their attitudes, by their spiritual oppression, to stay silent. Now, I'm not saying once you start speaking up, the person may not listen. If they don't listen and they won't hear you, that gives you information. They don't want to change. And they have that right. They don't want to change, and they have that right. And we're going to unpack what do you do then in the workshop. So if you're going to speak the truth in love to your spouse or to someone in your relationship with, and they tell you, buzz off, I'm not interested. Or you're right, but I'm not willing to change. Or they just completely ignore you. What do you do? What do you do? And I will help you figure that out in the workshop. So I would encourage you to kind of evaluate what might be possible if you got brave and strong enough to stop lying to yourself about your own stuff or about what's really happening in your life. And what does it cost you to not do it? Let me turn to answer some questions that you might have put on here. Years ago, my breakthrough from denial was from deeply learning the concept that God loves me more than he hates divorce. Sincerely, it was like being rescued by the good Lord above. Yeah, how many of us have believed that we were doing a noble sacrifice because God hates divorce? But you know what? I don't believe God hates all divorce. He hates a casual divorce for sure. Like, I'm not happy anymore. I'm going to find someone else. That's not how we marry, and that's not why we divorce. But God allowed divorce for the hardness of people's hearts. And that verse in Malachi 2:16 was never translated, God hates divorce, until the King James Version translated it that way. And now scholars are saying, we think we mistranslated that. It's a hard verse to translate. What does God hate? What does God hate? That's the question in that verse in the Hebrew. And so scholars have now said, actually, if you AI it and you go to AI, it actually really says, God hates when a man treats his wife treacherously and divorces her. He doesn't hate the divorce. He hates what causes the divorce. A man treating his wife treacherously. So I love that you said that, because God does love you, and God doesn't care more about the institution of marriage than he does the safety and the sanity of the people in it, any more than when Jesus challenged the Sabbath. And the religious leaders were so about the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath and had all these rules about the Sabbath. And the Sabbath is a holy day. But Jesus himself said, hey, if your kid or even your ox fell into a well, who wouldn't break the Sabbath and work to get that person out for their welfare? For their welfare. God cares about an ox who fell into a well. You can break the Sabbath to go get that that ox out, or that child. God cares about you. And if you're in a destructive relationship that's causing harm to you and your children, and he won't change, you are not making God mad by saying enough is enough. All right, where do you find a counselor who understands emotional covert abuse to help you with the next steps? I want to find a Christian counselor, but the one who won't be more damaging. That's a hard thing. And so let me just say that not all Christian counselors are educated in abuse. Not all pastors are educated in abuse. I just had a letter that I had to write to my own senior pastor about this, because he said some things from the pulpit that I strongly disagreed with, and I thought that would be harmful to women who were sitting there listening. But so I think you have every right to interview a counselor on their experience with dealing with emotional abuse, covert abuse. What do they know about it? What books have they read? What's their stance on divorce? All of those kind of things, to see if the person has educated themselves on abuse, what the Bible has to say about abuse. Because believe it or not, we talked about this yesterday. Our Facebook didn't work, but if you'd like a recording, Facebook people, of that Facebook Live that we did yesterday, please email our staff at assistant@leslievernick.com, and they'll send you an email of it, because Facebook wasn't live yesterday. Instagram and YouTube were, but Facebook wasn't. But if if you need some help on this and you're questioning that, it's really important that you educate yourself and you talk about it and you deal with it. And so talk to your counselor, ask them, what is your stand on this? What is your stand on divorce? How do you biblically see things? Before you agree to work with them, you have every right. You are a participant in this counseling relationship, and you want to make sure that you get someone who's educated in the subject of abuse. And many counselors and people are not. I was just at the Restore conference, and I was talking to someone who's a teacher, a professor in a PhD program in marriage and family. And I said, how many classes do you have on domestic violence? Do you know how many classes a marriage and family counselor has on domestic violence in most schools? Zero. So don't be surprised if they don't really know that much about it, and covert abusive tactics especially. So just ask them, interview them, and then, start working with them. And if it's not a good fit, it's okay for you to say, this isn't a good fit, and I don't think this is helpful. I would probably stay away from people who label themselves as biblical counselors unless you really know that person and know their heart, because at least the more conservative biblical counselors will use the God hates divorce and will use, you're to suffer and sacrifice for Jesus and try harder, and your job is to be the sacrificial lamb to keep your marriage together. They wouldn't say it that way, but that's about the message that comes across to most women. All right. What's the difference between a diagnosed narcissist and narcissistic behaviors? Isn't it true to say that an actual diagnosis of narcissism is rarer than common, and that the word is overused? Absolutely. I don't use the word. When I wrote my book on the emotionally destructive marriage, you won't see the word narcissism. I just use the word selfish. Narcissists are self-referenced and selfish. Everything is about them. And so I've used this metaphor before, but I'll use it again. A narcissist sees people as objects. So my cell phone is very useful to me. I love my cell phone. I carry it with me all the time. And as long as it does everything I need it to do, we're good. I'm going to keep this cell phone. As soon as it starts giving me grief, not working, not staying charged as it should, or new model, I see a new model that's more pretty, I'm going to discard this cell phone and get a different one. So a diagnosis of narcissism has to be done by a licensed psychologist or mental health professional who's licensed to do testing and evaluates them and diagnoses them. There's certain criteria that they have to. So please don't go to Google and say, is he a narcissist? Oh, he's a narcissist. That will actually get you in more trouble when you're trying to get help from people helpers. Because when you go to a people helper and you say, oh, my husband's a narcissist, and they'll say, well, how do you know that? Well, I looked on Google. They're going to think that you're making more of his behavior than you should to. You don't have the qualifications anymore than to diagnose your own medical problems, to diagnose mental health problems. But if there is a preponderance of selfishness, it's all about me, and a preponderance of a lack of empathy for anything about you. Like, I have no empathy for my cell phone. I love it. It's useful to me. But if it said, help, I'm needing to be charged, I wouldn't care about it. I might charge it because it's useful to me to be charged. It's not useful to me to not be charged. But I'm not thinking about my cell phone and its feelings and what it needs and how I can serve it. I'm not thinking at all about that. And so a narcissist has relationships, a diagnosed narcissist has relationships like that. They lack empathy and care for the other person, except for how it serves them. So I would be careful about diagnosing anybody as a narcissist if you're not a mental health professional. But everybody knows what selfish is, and everybody feels when you don't matter. You know what that feels like. And so this would be some of the questions that I might ask, or in conversation. Well, I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. Maybe you see it that way, but I don't see it that way. I see it differently. Does that matter to him? Or, hey, I can't help you right now because I need to do this. This is important to me. Does that matter to him? Or, I'm not feeling well. I need you to help me. Does that matter to them? Those would be ways to see if someone is excessively selfish, or can they give of themselves to meet your needs and help you too. And if they can do that, then they might be, if we look at this chart again that we talked about, they might be more over here than you, but they might be maybe a 1 and you're a -1, or they might be a 2 and you're a -2. They're not narcissistic diagnostically, but they're more on that side than you. And so oftentimes opposites attract that way. And so that may happen. But if they show care and concern for you and you ask for that, but this is the lie that we tell ourselves. Oh, I'm being selfish if I don't do it for him and I ask him, no, I want to do this instead. I'm being disobedient if I say no and, say I'm not willing to do that. I'm not willing to co-sign on that loan. I don't think it's smart. And this is why. And so we as women have been groomed by our teaching in the Christian world to overly accommodate, overly give. And then sometimes what happens is we get so fed up and so angry and so exhausted that we blow up. And then all of a sudden we've got all these boundaries and we look a little crazy because we've never done that before. And then we feel a little guilty because we've never done that before. And we think, oh, I'm really being, selfish and I shouldn't be doing that. And then we go back to our old ways. And it's that cycle. It's costing you not to be honest with yourself. Hey, I don't like the way I'm living. I need to start saying no earlier. I need to set boundaries. No, I don't want to watch a movie tonight. I'm tired. I need sleep. Is that okay? Is that okay for you to be honest with yourself and your spouse? Or the people in your house? I'm tired. I don't think I want to cook dinner tonight. Can we order a pizza? Is that okay for you to be honest with yourself and have other people care about you instead of you being the over-functioning, crazy dancing woman who makes everybody be okay except you? So those are the things that it costs you to not be honest with yourself. What might be possible if you started to be honest with yourself and say, hey, I'm a finite, limited human being who can't know it all, can't do it all, can't fix it all. Freedom to just be, to be who you are, where you are, so that you can grow into the woman that God called you to be. Let me answer another question here. Let's see the time. Okay. Being honest with myself and him triggers my husband into a rage. That often happens. Good self-awareness. Ooh, this isn't safe to be honest with him. I am trying to be honest with myself. Good. And trying to stay well. I wonder if it's actually possible to have healthy children when one of us wants to be healthy and the other one wants to avoid anything and everything. This is really a concern of mine because all children need at least one healthy parent. All children need at least one healthy parent. And if you are here and he is here, both of you are unhealthy in different ways, but you're both unhealthy. All right. So this woman is asking, wow, if I start getting healthier, we may not have a healthy marriage, but if I'm a healthy person, and I'm not reactive and I'm not repaying evil for evil, and I can show love with good boundaries, and I can exercise good self-care and good self-awareness, will my kids notice a difference between healthy and unhealthy? And they most certainly will. They most certainly will. They will notice a difference. What happens so often in these kind of marriages, though, is because you're both unhealthy, your kids model one or the other side. And they become healthy. And this is what God says, the sins of the parents are passed on to the next generation. So that's not what you want to do. You want to be a model of good emotional, spiritual, and mental health for your kids. How much freedom you have to do that when you're living with a really unhealthy person is debatable for some women. And some can do it. Some can stay well. And they can, and we've had children who've grown up and said, oh, my dad was such a bad person or such a lousy husband, but my mom, she was healthy. She was strong. She had good boundaries. She took care of herself and us. She didn't fool around. She didn't retaliate, but she dealt with her pain in a healthy way. And I admire her for that. And some women can't do that. It's not possible. And they have to show their kids that from a separation or a divorce, because I can't get healthy living in a home where I'm constantly berated, controlled, lied about, hurt. I can't do it. I'm not capable of staying healthy when I'm in an environment of such toxicity. And maybe your kids aren't either. So there's a continuum. And we have in our Conquer group, a phrase that we talk about. If you're going to stay, and you might choose to do that for a number of good reasons, stay well. How do you learn to get yourself healthy? And if you're going to leave leave well, because we can leave in a host of bitterness and resentment and codependency, and we think it's all him, and we've never looked at our issues. And so then we just repeat them. And we've had women in our membership, in our Conquer membership, who've been married 3 times to the same kind of man because they never did their own work. If you're still unhealthy and codependent, you're going to find someone else who's very similar, maybe has a different kind of problem, but very similar in that, because like attracts like. Unhealthy attracts unhealthy. Unhealthy doesn't attract healthy. Healthy attracts healthy, right? That's why if a narcissist over here went out with a woman over here in a one, they would argue, they would clash, they would never get married, because like attracts like. And as you start moving towards more health, this will create a little bit more tension in your relationships. Whether you can manage that in a godly way and do what you need to do to get healthy and strong and still maintain the home base for the kids, that's a lot of work. And some women have done it. I've seen it, and it's been wonderful. And some women can't do it for lots of different reasons. And don't beat yourself up because you can't. God will show you what you can and you can't do in the moment you're in with the strength that you have. Okay? When is the next Conquer group open? Conquer will not be open again until we'll be opening it in March. I think we have or April. We have a seminar that we'll invite you to. We'll be doing Facebook Lives before that. So what we're opening at this juncture is our Walking and Core Strength coaching group. So we'll open that after the workshop if you're interested in more intensive help with building that strength that we're talking about in these Facebook Lives. Learning to walk in the truth is the first core strength that we talk about. All right. All right. What if you had deal breakers against addictions and learned after marriage that they were just hid and lied to? Yeah. So now what? So you have to face the truth. He lied to me. He wasn't truthful. How are these addictions impacting me? How are these addictions impacting our family? How are these addictions, and can I live with this or can I not? Those are all self-reflective questions that a healthy person asks themselves when they face any kind of obstacle, any kind of challenge. How am I going to deal with this? What is this impact? How is this impacting me? Am I going to let it impact me in a negative way? Let's just do this in a very silly kind of way. Let's say you're driving along, going to the airport, ready to, go to a vacation or whatever you're going to do at the airport, take a plane somewhere for work, and you're stopped in a traffic jam. And you can't go anywhere. Here's an obstacle. Here's a challenge. Will you, as the main character of your story, get to decide? How am I going to handle this? Well, am I going to scream and rant and rave and honk and cry and, God, why is this happening to me? And this is so unfair. I mean, we could go there. And then how will you feel about yourself, about life, all of that when you're finished? Or you can go there a little bit, like all of us might, for a nanosecond or 2 minutes, and then say, God, help me to accept the things I cannot change. Help me to live in truth. I have a traffic jam. I'm not going to get to the airport. I'm not going to get on that plane. Help me to manage this truth in a good way. So maybe it's not about what's going on out there. Maybe it's about what's going on in here. How do I learn to accept reality? I am not getting to the airport in a way that's peaceful, in a way that trusts God, in a way that can calm down, in a way that can distract herself and listen to an audiobook while she's waiting for an hour for traffic to clear up. Whatever you might need to do, you get to decide. You get to decide how you, as the main character in your story, handles adversity. And so often we allow ourselves to feel helpless, powerless, and victimized. Like, oh, he did this to me and I have no choices. You absolutely have choices. But you can't make them if you're lying to yourself about what's really going on, even inside of you. So what might be possible if you learned to be honest with yourself, with the truth? All right, I'm going to do one more question. And then while I'm answering this question, I want you to think about what's your takeaway from today. What's your takeaway from today? What is it that God is speaking to you about? And maybe your takeaway is, I need to sign up for that workshop. And if it is, please do that now. It's at leslievernick.com/join webinar. It's a webinar. It'll be about 50 minutes long. We're going to stay for another hour for Q&A. The Q&A will be a little bit more private because it's not on social media. And we really want to help you learn to be okay, even if the traffic isn't okay. I'm going to learn to be okay, even if he doesn't change. How am I going to stay healthy? How am I going to get strong? You must learn to do that, because if God has given us everything we need for life and godliness, sometimes we need the adversity to build the muscles. No one works out with styrofoam weights. Sometimes life becomes hard so that we can build those muscles. Consider it all joy whenever you face hard, James says, because you will build muscles of perseverance and godly character. And that's most important to God. That's the one thing. That's the one thing of Philippians. So that I might become like Christ. Right? All right, one more question. My spouse left me and my therapist gave me the emotionally destructive marriage. But why is it easier to self-blame instead of looking and accepting reality? I think it's easy to self-blame because if you're self-aware, so self-awareness knows that you're not perfect. So if I'm in a traffic jam, I might self-blame myself for leaving late or not putting in a different route, all of those kind of things, because we want to have control. And so if somehow I'm to blame, then I can fix it, right? And there might be a smidgen of truth that if I only didn't argue with him in that moment, he wouldn't have hit me in that moment, right? There's some smidgen of truth. Or if only I would have been willing to have a threesome like he wanted, he wouldn't have had an affair and had a threesome with someone else, right? So there's a smidgen of truth. Maybe he wouldn't have. But does he not have any agency of his own? Like, so often we've been blamed for their behavior, or we've blamed ourselves for their behavior. And there's like a smidgen of truth enough for us to get caught in it. But actually, each person is accountable for their own behavior. So even when I am provoked by someone because they didn't do what I wanted, you're a mom, probably most of you are moms. How many times do your kids provoke you? They don't do what you want. They don't turn off the TV. They don't go to bed. They don't wash their face. They don't brush their teeth. You have choices to make. Am I going to beat my kids because they didn't do what I wanted? Or am I going to handle myself as the kind of mom I want to handle myself? Well, your husband has choices too. And you might not be the perfect wife. You might not do what he wants, just like he's not going to do everything you want. How you handle you is 100% up to you. Unless you're not conscious and you're lying to yourself and you're blaming everybody else for the way that you show up. How you show up is 100% up to you. And I want to teach you about that in our workshop. All right, what is your takeaway? What is your takeaway from today? I'd love to hear that. What are some of your takeaways from today? Let me just see if I can see that. Yeah, I struggle with that. I struggle with being honest with myself. I didn't know that. It's easy to be honest about what I observe in someone else, but it's not so easy to observe my own heart, what's going on inside of my own heart. And when you live with a destructive person, understand that it not just impacts you, it infects you with poison, hatred, bitterness, resentment, sinful anger, and understandably so. But Paul says, do not let that overcome you, because it's going to cost you to be destructive too. Overcome evil with good. How do you do that? By paying attention to what's going on in your heart. Guard your heart above all else. It is the wellspring of life. Who does that for you if you don't? If you don't. So please, if this is piquing your interest of how do I do this, come to our workshop on Thursday. Show up and learn. Another takeaway, taking care of yourself as a vessel of God is more important than the marriage. More important than the marriage. Marriage is important to God, but we've made it into something that is idolatrous in our culture. It's not always been that way, but in our culture, it sort of is. Like Leah said, if he doesn't love me, I will die. No, you won't. Because God loves you. He defines you. He made you. You are not defined by your husband or your parents. You are defined by God, who said you are his workmanship, created to do good things in this life. You are his image bearer. Now go build that character inside of you. That's the one thing. That's the one thing of Philippians, is that everything serves to build our Christ-likeness inside of us, including the hard. So don't avoid reality because it's there to teach you. Thank you for being with me. I would love to see you on Thursday, so I hope you show up live. Live will be much more robust than the recording. If you can't be there live or you want to watch it again, you will get a recording, but show up live because the live is very different than just a stale me talking to you and you have no interaction with other people on the chat and you can't ask a question if something strikes you. So please show up live. I would love to see you there. And again, it'll be about 50 minutes long. Then I'll stay for an hour or so, sometimes an hour and a half, depending on how many questions there are, to ask questions. And my coach, Diana, will be on with me. So she'll help me answer the questions in case my voice starts giving out. All right. So take care. God bless. I'll see you on Thursday. We will have no Facebook Live tomorrow as I'll be prepping for the webinar. And I want to give my full attention to that. And we'll see you Thursday. All right. Bye-bye. God bless.